is Dr. Daniel Van Ingen with this week's Parenting Podcast. I'm really excited to be back. We're back to doing some parenting podcasts. I know we've gone through a lot over the last several months with the pandemic, but I am here with an interview. We're restarting the Parenting Doctor Series interviews, and I've got just a treat, a great guy coming from Colorado. His name is Jedd Hafer. Sorry. His name is Jedd Hafer. He's a great guy, and Jedd he's a well-known comedian in Colorado. He's a national speaker. Today he's going to be speaking on emotional intelligence, de-escalation, and preventing anger from turning into violence. Jedd is a longtime comedian, a longtime speaker for Love and Logic. He's been a consultant for families and law enforcement, and I am so excited to have you back, Jedd, or not back, but here for the first time. I could tell that I've been out of it a little bit. I've already made 2 quick errors.
It's a great pleasure, man. It feels like I've been on before because we've known each other for a long time, which is my great pleasure.
Thank you. It's my honor to have you. And Jedd, if you don't mind, just for the audience, I want to put in a little plug in for some of your work, just to give them some of your background, because you've done a lot of stuff. And I don't know how you've been involved. Is that okay?
That's great.
I don't know how you've written 11 books, and I know that some of your books have been with your brother Todd Hafer, great team.
That's how I did it. I did it with my brother. That's how you write a lot of books, is you have a really smart brother who does all the editing, and essentially all I have to do is the nouns, and then he does all the verbs and all the other stuff.
Jedd has a book called Solitude, Finding Peace for the Stressed Out Soul. And as you know, everyday work stress oftentimes has people looking for ways to relieve their anxiety, and whether it's the noise and chaos of crowded streets, bumper-to-bumper traffic, or something as easy as getting a spot in the grocery line. So there's some great ideas in this book, so check it out, Solitude. And Jedd's a longtime author, so I want to share some of the other pieces, some of the other works that Jedd has done. A book called Shrink Your Stress in 5 Steps, 5 simple steps to lower stress and enjoy every day. And also Jedd has some fun books. As a comedian, is a great background with a hilarious collection of stories. And Jedd, you have this book that I was looking up. I haven't read it, but I want to read it. It's Snickers from the Front Pew, Confessions from 2 Preacher's Kids.
That was our very first book my brother Todd and I did together. I was traveling as a stand-up comedian, and he was an author. He was already an established author. And it's all true stories that we made up about being preacher's kids. And if anybody who grew up in church, you'll recognize these stories about potlucks and just all kinds of nonsense that we got into growing up as preacher's kids. It's pretty funny. There's zero substance to it. It's all silliness.
That's fun. And I don't know how in 2006 you guys were pumping out the books, but you had 3 books come out in 2016. I meant 2016. I mean, that's a big time year for publishing. You have a great book.
Yeah, I have a lot of free time.
The book Laugh a Lot, Your Daily Dose of Wholesome Humor. Also another book called Wit and Wisdom for the Workplace, a little survival guide for life on the job. And then earlier that year, The Pocket Grandpa, grandfatherly wit and wisdom at your fingertips.
That one actually has some good tips in there. That one is also sold through the Love and Logic Institute. And it has some Love and Logic kind of ideas for grandpas or grandmas. We figured grandma would buy it for grandpa. The trick is that my brother worked for Hallmark for years, and so he's really good at turning out these kind of little gift books. A lot of them are meant to, somebody, especially teachers, when you don't know what to get, and there's only so many Applebee's gift cards you can give somebody. Then we wanted these books to be good gifts that people could give to their favorite teacher or boss or whoever.
And Jedd is a longtime speaker, and I also want to highlight an audio piece, Love and Logic in Tough Situations, when you feel like you're at the end of your rope. And that's a streaming audio, also CD old school. And if
you're old school, you can get the CD.
Yeah, and you can just Google Love and Logic in Tough Situations, and loveandlogic.com comes up. So that's another great resource that's going to add a lot of value to the audience's life. So some great
I'm really
work
proud
that
of
you've done.
One. That is a lot of stories of when I worked for years and years with troubled teenagers, kids in residential treatment and court-ordered placements. It's just all the best things that I learned from really smart people about working with kids who act out, maybe on the more extreme end.
Yeah, I just love your background, Jedd. I mean, you were a stand-up comic for many years. I remember in high school when you were just starting out, you came to Mr. Leonard's class, and you were doing some stand-up comedy. Do you remember that?
Well, that was in the 1900s, I believe. 1902 or something. No, yeah, there's probably people listening who were not alive yet at that time. But I started pretty young doing stand-up, and it turned into, after years of doing that, I started doing some speaking, and I learned that if you're only a little bit funny as a comedian, people are kind of disappointed. But as a speaker, if you're just a little bit funny, they're usually pleasantly surprised. So it was a much better, it was like a layup. It was like moving in for a much closer shot.
As you say, the 1900s, you said that as I'm icing my plantar issue on my right foot, and I've got ice on my right shoulder.
Oh, man. I know you've been working out. You're inspiring people. That's great.
So, but I know what you mean about, that was way back when. But Jedd is, as a longtime comic, also a director of a home for troubled teens. And you've worked with a lot of parents, so you have a lot of experience. So, Jedd, let's get right into it, because you have a number of different work areas that you've done and served, and you have a lot of expertise in the areas of emotional intelligence, de-escalation, and preventing anger from turning into violence. Let's start with emotional intelligence. What are some of the keys when it comes to emotional intelligence in working with police departments as well as with families?
Well, I think the real key is just don't be emotionally dumb. No, I'm kidding. I don't want people to think that's all they're getting. It's a term right now. It's a real commonly used kind of a hot term that people will throw around. And to me, all it really means is being intentional about the way that you treat people and being more intentional about our communication so that people receive the messages we want them to receive. And generally, it's, we're usually dealing with people that we like or love, but the way we treat them doesn't always match up with that. And what I hope to help people do in relationships, and you do this so well, it's treat the people you love in a way that matches up with how you feel about them, instead of maybe taking out your bad day or your frustration on one of your kids or someone close to you. Emotional intelligence, I think, starts with self-awareness, and then it really, really gives us a base of empathy. When I teach de-escalation, we spend a lot of time, and it's a big part of Love and Logic for people who are familiar. We spend a lot of time on empathy and learning to be intentional about our empathy so that it's not misconstrued.
How do we build empathy? And is that something that men can do?
Yeah, sometimes it's for not being as naturally empathetic. I remember I worked at the facility for teen boys, and we started using some of these techniques, especially that I had learned from the Love and Logic guys, they changed my life with their wisdom. And it was going very well. The techniques were going well, and the kids' behaviors were improving, and the staff morale was improving. And about 2 miles away, we had a program for girls. And some people are wondering, 2 miles apart, is that far enough? Not quite. Once in a while, they would try to reach each other, but they moved me over. They said the girls program is really struggling. Why don't you go over there and do some of that stuff over there with the teen girls? And I had not really worked with that population before, and I knew I was kind of in charge of discipline, so I knew I was going to have some very upset teen girls in my office, and so I knew empathy was going to be important. So Love and Logic talks about having phrases that you use, kind of ready to go. And in this case, I blew it. So this was my empathy phrase. Dan, you tell me how well this worked. I said to these really upset teen girls, I know just how you feel. How did that go? 3 words: disaster. Terrible, terrible. Because when you say that to someone, what are they going to say? No, you don't know how I feel. And by the way, that was a lie. I mean, what I was saying was a cliche, and it was also not true. I had no idea what these young ladies had been through. And so a man, this is good news, around that time something kind of sad happened in my life. And a good friend who was a male, all of these people came up to try to cheer me up and say kind of happy, trite, cliche things. This one guy said to me, oh man, I can't even imagine. That's got to be so hard.
Yeah.
So he speculated about my pain. Instead of saying, oh, I know how you feel, which I would have probably resented, just like those girls, he said the truth, which was, I don't know what this is like. I bet it's hard. And I filed that away, and the next time I had really upset teen girl in my office, which I think was probably about one day later, I said the truth, which was, oh, that's got to be hard. I don't know what that's like. That must be really, really hard. So it's not, and my boss at Love and Logic used to say this, it's not my ability to understand, it's the quest to understand. Really good empathy is I want to rejoice with you when you rejoice, or mourn with you when you mourn. I don't have to be great at it. It's how sincerely I am trying that I think is really the key with empathy.
Yeah, I really like that. And
then, of course, you got to have little deal empathy. In Love and Logic, we're always handing problems back to kids.
yeah.
So I can't say, if a kid comes up and goes, I can't find my pencil, I'm not going to say, that must be so hard. That must really hurt. I'm not going to say that because it doesn't match.
Right.
I always think of it like a dial. I need to turn the dial to try to match the emotional intensity of the other person.
Yeah.
And so for that, I would just do little deal empathy, which for me was usually just a noise. I would just go, oh. And then in Love and Logic, you ask the question, well, what are you going to do? Because if it's a small, affordable problem, I'm not going to solve it for the kid. I'm going to lovingly hand it back so they get some practice solving problems.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
So that's my advice for people with empathy is have a big deal empathy in mind, and then have a little deal empathy in mind. And you might get really advanced and get some steps in between there, but having a little one and a big one always served me pretty well.
So one of the things, Jedd, that's gone on these last 3 months that we all know about, but as an effect of what's gone on during this pandemic, is that the intensity, the dial, has been very high. You have increased anxiety, increased intensity in terms of conflict among couples. You have increased conflict among moms and dads with their teens, and you have increased alcohol and drug abuse, and just a lot of problems. There's been a high level of intensity because people aren't going out. People aren't leaving the house because of the shutdown for a while there.
Yes.
And so they need to learn empathy skills both at low dial and all the way up to high dial.
Absolutely. And I think during the time where most people have been kind of shut in, a few things happen. One, we probably spend way more time on devices, and we're created to be face-to-face beings. We're made that way, I believe, and there's research to back that up. I'm a fan of a guy named Bruce Perry, and he said that we're developing a biologically disrespectful lifestyle, meaning we're made to be face-to-face beings, and that's where empathy is on your face a lot of times. It's not just in the words you use, but it's in your facial expression and body language. And people were spending an awful lot of time, and still are, and we understand that's the way the world is, but we spend an inordinate amount of time on devices and not enough time looking at each other's faces. And I think that hurts empathy. I think that not having healthy outlets, as you mentioned, if we're all stressed out, and we are, in some cases, we don't have as much access. But I don't buy that excuse, at least for myself. I can always exercise somewhere. I can always take some deep breaths and spend some time. I can pray. I can meditate. I can read things that are good for my soul. But what we tend to go to is those, when we're stressed, we go to those things that aren't very healthy. And as you mentioned, drug and alcohol and a lot of, we'll say, unhealthy coping skills were on the rise. And then, of course, that's going to spill over into how we treat each other. Yeah. If I'm feeding myself a lot of unhealthy stuff, I'm going to kind of vomit that out on the people around me that I love. Sorry for the gross metaphor.
So, yeah, because that's sort of what happens emotionally. We just express just a lot of that negative. But it seems like, your book Solitude, Finding Peace for the Stressed Out Soul, it really gets into really turning off those devices, right? And
I'll save everybody. You don't have to read the book. It says, breathe some air, get off your phone, go outside, look at something beautiful. It's a very simple book. It's not an in-depth. I don't think anybody will be too impressed with the psychology. It's very, very simple, but we try to challenge the reader to actually do it. We have some, little action steps. Go outside, go for a little walk without your phone. I see people I've seen a lot of people out walking lately as things are opening back up. And I see a lot of people walking and, bless their hearts, they're listening to music, and maybe it's really good music, maybe it's really uplifting stuff, but it seems like everybody's got headphones in, and they might even be listening to something, but also doing something on a screen. And I live in Colorado. It's a beautiful place. And I'm always thinking, let's look around and see this incredible creation around us. And there's some science to this. When we get outside and we get in green spaces and we take in expansive views, there are some things that actually happen to our brain. I know that doctors in the UK are actually prescribing hiking, and it has to be out away from the city. It has to be away from civilization a little bit, but they're actually prescribing this to patients. You've got to go and hike somewhere where it's maybe a little green and there's not a bunch of buildings and traffic.
Yeah, I really like that idea. When it comes to some of these things, I'm a big fan of having screen-free zones. So turning off the devices in the bedroom, turning them off at dinner time.
Dinner table, yes.
And then in the car ride. And so there's a time to detach. There's a time where we need to turn off the devices, see the beauty, connect with nature, take on those expansive views, go hiking in the nature. And then there's a time when the empathy statement is needed from a relational perspective, because it helps us to connect. How do you know when? So we need to do those things, turn off the devices, and then there's times when we need to be able to...
We need to have a conversation.
That's right.
Yeah. I love what you said about the car, because that's a place most people are very guilty of getting on their devices. Hopefully not the driver, but everyone else in the car. And my boss at Love and Logic, Dr. Charles Fay, would say the same thing. He said, that's a time wonderful conversations happen in the car, and sometimes it takes a little bit of the pressure. If it's a tough conversation I need to have with my teen, for instance, number one, they're kind of trapped in there with me. But number two, if they're not on a device, we don't necessarily have to look right into each other's eyes and add intensity to it, but maybe they feel a little less threatened or a little more comfortable having maybe a tougher conversation, or just the really fun, informal stuff. I think it's underestimated, the power of just being with someone, just spending time in each other's presence that's not focused on anything else, and maybe we don't even have to say a lot. But I did learn a good trick. If I want to start a conversation with my kid, a great love and logic trick that I learned was to start with an apology. So let's say that I want my teen to be more responsible about getting this homework turned in via the Zoom or whatever, all this virtual schooling. I might start and say, hey, I need to apologize to you, and that will get a kid's attention. You're almost guaranteed to hear what? I've been nagging you too much. You're getting pretty old and pretty mature, and you're getting too big for me to be nagging you, so I was thinking about it. I think this needs to be more your thing, and I need to be nagging you less. What do you think about that? And so now your foot is in the door, and if my goal, and here the intentionality about it, I think the best parents, the best people who work with kids are just very intentional. And I don't mean conniving or manipulative in a bad way, but just there's a real purpose in the things that we're doing. And the purpose in this case, I wanted to hand some of the responsibility, more of it, over to my kid. And then I might start mentioning some ideas. How about if I only help you when you ask for help? How would that be? Or how about, and just go through, and this is to your taste in terms of some people have different comfort level helping their kids or nagging their kids. But I'm a big believer in handing them responsibility so that I don't expect them to just grow up one day and be 21 and all of a sudden they take over everything. It has to be more gradual than that. We learn how to handle freedom and responsibility.
Yeah. So, Jedd, emotional intelligence, self-awareness, being intentional, having empathy, which, as you said, is honesty, I can't even imagine, made an impact on you. I know that has touched my life. Even last year, you really showed empathy for me when I was going through a situation and through the ups and downs. I know you've been there many times, and but then there's the de-escalation piece. So using your metaphor of the dial, and we think about intensity, and intensity might, if we use a scale, right, 0 to 10, and we're talking about 1, 2s, and 3s as low intensity, but then there's 6s, 7s, and 8s. In terms of anger, and what are some of the key things with regards to de-escalation? Because sometimes things can reach a level of intensity, and now we're sort of past. I don't know. Do we get past the empathy stage? Do you think?
I think. There's some judgment involved here, but for me, when it gets to these really high numbers, it's often better to not say anything right away. A really, really angry person, in some cases at least, needs some space and some time. They still need empathy, but I would say hopefully most of that's going to be on my face. They're going to see that I hurt for them. I'm sad for them. I'm not mad at them. Even if I don't love their behavior during this time when they're really upset, it's still important to lead with empathy, but I don't think it's going to, the people who seem to be the best at this, it's not a lot of words that they're using. They're just conveying it pretty quietly. So depending on the situation, again, this would depend a lot on the age of the kid, my relationship with them, and what the behavior is. But in general, a really upset person, I like to give them space if I can safely do so. I might say, hey, I'm going to be right over there when you're ready to talk. Seems like you're really upset. if you want to talk, I'm going to be right over there, and I'm going to go sit down and give them that space and time. Usually when you give someone space, you're also giving them time. And I like to take away the sense of urgency that something needs to happen right this minute. We have a tendency, here's the worst de-escalation phrase of all time, and I've used it many times. Calm down. That's got a track record for not working. Hundreds and hundreds of years worth of not ever working.
Have we ever heard
What's
anyone
going on
calmly
that's
say
my
that?
need. I want this to be over, and I want to control things, and so I tell the person to calm down. Well, that's not going to calm anybody down. And, of course, there's a lack of empathy in that statement as well.
Yeah,
We've all done it, though.
Right.
So instead, hey, you seem really upset, or something that conveys that I get it. You don't have to be demonstrating how upset you are by breaking anything. I see it. By the way, I don't say I get it either. That's not a good empathy statement. Yeah. But wow, seems like you're really, really hurting right now, or you're really upset. And if I can safely do so, again, this would change depending on little kid versus big kid versus close relationship with me versus someone I don't know. But I like to, when possible, give some space and time and take away any sense of I'm going to try to control you right now. Because people will fight for control. If they don't feel control, they'll fight pretty hard to get it.
Yeah. Jedd,
does that make sense? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And so you sort of have to give them choices. And now, how about when anger goes very intense? So you need to give them their space. What about when you're in a situation where you can't give them space? Like, let's say you're going to be working a lot with law enforcement, and you have in the past.
This is my new venture. I was going to a lot of schools and teaching these teachers how to, not get anger flung at them, or how to not lose their own cool and do things they would regret. And so now with schools closed, my new focus is law enforcement. It's going to be called Mission Peace. We just launched the new organization.
Nice.
I have a team of really smart people who are hoping to just bring more peace, to our society in general, but especially the unique challenges that law enforcement face, where they get some pretty angry people that they have to deal with. They have to deliver a lot of bad news. And by the way, empathy is your friend when you have to deliver bad news too. If I'm sad for you or sad with you, it's that empathy can really kind of ease. It can make it feel less like I'm the bad guy and more like whatever, just this result. If you're getting a speeding ticket, the ticket's the bad guy. I'm not going to lecture you. I'm not going to show a lot of anger and frustration. I'm just going to be kind of like, oh man, this is no fun. I'm going to have, that's my overall attitude, is just empathy for you, because it's no fun to get a ticket or to get in trouble.
Yeah.
When we get to the really heavy duty stuff, obviously if it gets to a point of violence, then my emotional intelligence skills go out the window. If I'm a parent, if kids are really getting violent with their parents, the parents have to do something to get that situation safe, all the way up to maybe they do need to call the police, or they have to get out, or they have to call for some other help. For law enforcement, it starts to, when it's escalating to a point of physicality, then their procedures take over.
Yeah.
What I would teach is everything short of that, because I'm not going to mess with their procedures. That's not my place. What I hope to do is give them the skills that everything they could possibly do, short of anything that's a use of force situation, or it might just be someone's being really belligerent and pretty nasty to them. And can we win people over, even if they start out being pretty awful to us? Well, I've seen this done many, many times by people who are masterful at it, and I think I've really distilled down what some of their tricks are.
Jedd, are master negotiators, are they who can deal with the belligerent and the nasty, even if they have hostage situations, what are some of the tricks that they use to? Is part of what they use empathy building in the middle of tense situations?
Believe it or not, a person who's done something really, really extreme, and I'm trying to negotiate with them, talk them down, get them to be safe and compliant again, I really do want them to like me, but also respect me at the same time. So years ago, one of my very first de-escalation trainings that I put on, it was for social workers. They had a big room, and they didn't have very many people coming, so they invited the probation officers, and they invited some law enforcement people. And lo and behold, I had a hostage negotiator guy in my training, and I'm talking about de-escalation, and I felt like an idiot because thinking this guy's probably forgotten more about de-escalation than I'll ever learn. I got done, and he was the first one to come up to me, and he said, all of that stuff that you were teaching, that's the stuff that works. That's what I do. It's the stuff I teach, because he also taught this stuff. There's kind of two levels, though, and I try to separate out. This is in my training. I try to separate out is the person being proactively aggressive or reactively aggressive. And if they're being proactively aggressive, that's when negotiation skills kick in. If they're in their not smart part of their brain, right? So limbic system is engaged, and they are not really thinking. They're reacting, and they're flooded with emotion. They're not
amygdala hijacked. Yeah.
Yeah, the brain's been hijacked by their fight or flight system, and we always say the angrier we get, the dumber we get, or the more upset we get, the dumber we get. And of course, that's only true for other people, not ourselves. But yeah. So if I've got a wide-eyed, and I'll sometimes separate out into wide-eyed or narrow-eyed. So if someone's eyes are wide, and you can just see, okay, there's no thinking going on. This is a very upset, reactive person. Well, I'm not going to have very much luck being rational, negotiating, talking out solutions with that person. I've got to get that person to a more reasonable state, into what we would call a thinking state. Otherwise, my negotiation is going to be... you ever see those old Far Side cartoons and the guy's yelling at his dog?
Yeah.
And he says, Ginger, stay out of the trash, Ginger. I told you, Ginger, don't get in the trash. And then it says what the dog hears. Blah, 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 Ginger. Blah, 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 Ginger. It's like the dog only hears its name and nothing else. A really angry, upset person, if they're escalated to a point where they're in the reactive part of their brain and not the thinking part of their brain, I can't reason with a brain stem. That's another kind of famous love and logic line. So I only have one goal. If they're so extremely upset that they're not rational, my only goal is to get them back down into a thinking state enough where they can understand and we can actually come to some mutual understanding.
Yeah.
Now, on the other side of it, if I have a person, and you've seen this before, kids will do it. Kids will act out proactively. This is when their eyes are squinty and narrow. They're looking out of the corner of their eye. They're trying to check and see what your reaction is.
Yeah.
This is proactive aggression. And when I have someone who's being proactively, meaning they're calm, or calmer at least, they're thinking, it's goal-driven, they're up to something, they're trying to accomplish something. Now that person you can negotiate with. So I look at the eyes. That's one of my little tricks for individuals. If I see wide eyes, I'm not going to waste a lot of words, and I'm not going to try to do much negotiating until they get calm enough. But if I see narrow eyes, squinty eyes, you'll see like a furrowed brow. I would always joke that if they're rubbing their hands together and plotting like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons. Excellent. If they're up to something, you can tell when kids are up to something, and these little gears, little boys, you can just see the little gears turning in there. That's a person I can negotiate with. And then it's about, and this is what the hostage guy said to me, I figure out what they want. I know what I want. I want, peace and resolution to this situation. But I figure out what they want, and then I try to frame, hey, let's figure out a better way to get what you want. So kids used to run away from our center, and we'd go talk to them, And when they were calming down enough to talk, I'd say, what's going on? What do you want? They'd say, I want out of here. I hate being in this place away from home. And I'd say, that's a perfectly noble thing to want. I would want that too, empathy. Hey, let's figure out a better way to get you that. Because running away, you get caught, they actually make you stay longer. Let's figure out a good way to get you what you want. That's healthy negotiation, as long as it doesn't cross over into what we would call appeasement. You don't really give the hostage taker guy the helicopter, right? You get him to believe that this is going to resolve in a way that's okay and works out for him. I'm curious, Dan, are you a good negotiator, like, say, over a price or something?
You like when I was in China and you could negotiate prices, and I was trying to get this blanket or something, and I walked away believing, yeah, I really got that guy, and my friend Tia Chung made it very clear that they wouldn't have sold it if they didn't actually get me. So
yeah, not so much. I had the same thing when I bought a used car, and I thought, man, I did a really good job. And I walked out, and I turned around, I saw them all high-fiving each other. I was like, oh, maybe I didn't go so well.
A friend of mine just bought a car, and he went in the next day, and he said, man, the guys were telling me, you got such a great deal. And then he was telling me how they were telling him that he had such a great deal, and I was joking with him saying that, yeah, the PowerPoint presentation that car salesmen were told last week, make sure you tell every purchaser the next day if you see them come back in, they had such a great deal. Yeah, we all have that post-malaise or post-bias, right, that we somehow negotiated well.
We want to think we did well, bless our hearts. But I think in this case, the real key is discerning: is this a person that can even negotiate or not? And this is a mistake I'll see parents make. They're trying to still talk and reason with a kid who's not in that thinking state, and we're wasting a lot of oxygen there. And in some cases, we're making it worse because we're adding stimulus to an already escalated person. And one of the real basic principles of de-escalation that I teach is generally we want to reduce stimulus. I don't want to get right in somebody's face and they're seeing that vein pop out of my forehead, and I'm adding volume to their universe of stimulus, and I'm breathing my Frito pie breath right in their face. That was a bad choice, for lunch. And anytime I'm adding stimulus to, let's just say, an upset kid, I'm really sending them in the wrong direction if I want them thinking and making good decisions.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's really good stuff. Hey, Jedd, does this fit? I was thinking about when you were talking about having the officer, who's handing out the ticket when he's delivering bad news. He's sad for you. He's sad with you. How empathy,
nice.
And this is really difficult, I know, as he gives them the ticket. And I was thinking how, for parents, you put parent in this situation, often a parent might change the consequence or not follow through on loss of phone for 24 hours or whatever it is. If you continue to follow through, but incorporate empathy. I know it's really difficult. The bad news is the consequence, but we're going to follow through. Does that make sense?
That's it. I mean, really, that's love and logic. We would err on the side of really following through with the consequence. And I mean, if I was taking a phone, if I'm advising parents, I'm telling them take it for longer. I'm telling them to really take it in the first place. I mean, this will make you better than most parents. Most parents will threaten to take the phone away 27 times and never take it.
Yeah.
But, the kid's abusing the phone, so you're not taking the phone away because it's the thing they love. You're taking it away because it's a logical result of their abusing the phone. They're, contacting things they shouldn't contact or going on sites they shouldn't be on or whatever. So you're sad for them and you say, oh, bad news. We provide this as long as it's not causing a problem. but it caused a problem, so we're going to be hanging on to this. And, of course, I'm rooting for parents. Take it and then keep it longer, because you don't want to have to do this over and over again. If you do it, if it's significant, you're upping the odds that you won't have to repeat this. But then it's exactly what you said. If I'm sad for you and I resist my urge, because here's what I want to say. Well, you should have listened to me. I told you. You know what? I told you I was going to take it away. And you didn't listen to me. Now I'm ruining a lot of the value of the consequence. Jim Fay, the founder of Love and Logic, who's just such a wise man, he would always say, let the consequence do the teaching. And that means I have to shut up, which is hard for me. And I have to probably use fewer words. This is another principle I learned from these guys, is when I over-explain things, I can sometimes send an unintentional message that says, you're not very bright, kid. I got to tell you. But if I can get away with fewer words and just be sad for you, and I've got the phone, and you get to have it back when I see you being responsible about some of these other things we've talked about, then it's not to say the kid's not going to get mad at me and they're still not going to say, oh, you're mean, and be resentful. That can still happen, of course. But I'm sending, just like you said, I'm sending this really strong message without having to say a lot of words.
So I think, Jedd, let me ask you this: do they have some of those nonverbal facial expressions that you mentioned, like their eyes are big and they're looking to figure something out, and that's somebody that we can problem solve with, reason with, and then there's the other who's not thinking right. You said the angrier you get, the dumber you get, right? They're in their brain stem. I wonder if parents. So then if they've lost it, they need that time out. But I think a lot of parents I talk to, they often want to know, but how do you de-escalate? So if they are flooded, right? Their amygdala hijacked, right? Their ability to learn, abstract, inhibit, reason, problem solving. Their frontal lobe is overwhelmed by their amygdala. But how do we dial that intensity back down? Besides prescribing nature, besides timeout, but within the conversation. So, for example, you're in a long car ride, and you're driving from Florida to Tennessee, or you're in a very difficult situation where you have to make a decision. Say, like you're at school and there's some kind of decision that needs to be made. And sometimes there isn't a chance to go de-escalate, and then we'll come back, we'll talk about it tomorrow night at dinner, right? Sometimes we need to figure out how to de-escalate now. How do we dial that down, and what are some things that parents can do?
Yeah, first I would say, and I'm a fan of delaying things, and so sometimes it feels like we can't delay it, but we really can. I notice this with EMTs. Once in a while we'd have some serious situation go on our campus, and I saw the EMTs, and I noticed they never ran, and they kind of never looked panic, and we're literally dealing with life and death stuff, but they just would walk briskly, and it would still be very professional and matter-of-fact and not too emotional themselves. And, of course, some of that's repetitions and training. But some of it also is just they realize, wow, if I kind of lose it or I hurt myself because I come sprinting in, then the problem's now worse. And so I would just say first that sometimes it feels urgent and I got to do something right now. And we've kind of been taught that a lot in parenting and in education, something that I think can be a myth, that, you got to handle that right now or you're going to lose the teaching moment, or you got to handle that right now for one reason or another. And honestly, a lot of times I don't. I can just take a breath and think, say some good mantras and self-talk to myself. The one I use a lot when my kids are really pushing my buttons is I would say, it's not about me. Over and over again in my head, I would just say, it's not about me. It's not about me. Reminding myself that I have a role to take care of this kid emotionally.
Yeah.
But let's suppose it is. It's one of those instances where there really is urgency, and I've got to I've got to perform now, right? I've got to use my skills in an intense situation, and this is the stuff that I teach, that I'm going to be teaching professionals now.
Which is what police officers have to do all the time.
Yeah, and there's an element of breathing to it, and I'm really a big fan of breathing. And I learned a little trick recently. Most people know that if I'm going to try to stay calm and breathe intentionally, that it should be longer on the exhale, right? Most people will do that. Say you're taking two beats in and then 4 or 6 beats to blow that air out.
Yeah.
The new trick I learned fairly recently is take an extra little breath in. So I'm going to breathe in 2, and then I'm going to get one more little inhale, like a mini inhale right on the back end of that first inhale.
Yeah.
And it can sound like a sniff sometimes, but that's not, as long as you don't sound like you're like sniffing like you think the person has BO. But if it makes a noise at all, it might sound like you just breathed in and you just do a little baby sniff, right? And then the exhale, and as long as possible. I've watched people do this intentional breathing thing, and they're not saying a word. Super escalated kid right in front of them, right in their face, and they just breathe. And there are these cool, you probably know about these because you know all that doctor talk, but there are these neurons called mirror neurons.
Yeah.
And what they really do in our brain is go, hey, what's everybody doing? It's why, like if somebody yawns in a room, everyone else starts yawning if they see that.
Yeah.
Or it could be that I'm speaking. That'll happen sometimes, is everyone's yawning, and it means that I'm up there speaking. Just kidding. But you can utilize the mirror neurons of this other person that you're trying to help calm down. There's a pacing effect there where you've seen this with, I know you've seen this one. Someone's starting to get louder, and the other person gets louder. And then they get louder and sharper, and they start interrupting each other at quicker and quicker intervals, and pretty soon it's a Jerry Springer episode or whatever. And now, by the way, that's when we get angrier, we get dumber. That's known as the Jerry Springer effect, I think. I just made that up, but I think we should call it that. The same pacing, though, can work to our advantage, where I'm intentionally breathing slower, and it's calming me down. And I like coping skills that have a physiological impact. And this is why I like your work, too, because you're aware of the body and mind together. It's not just one or the other. So deep breathing has a physiological impact in terms of relaxing our muscles and lowering our blood pressure and reducing the rush of some of those not good stress hormones that are rushing through our body.
Yeah.
Really, when we're calming down, if someone's paying attention to us, we're having a neurochemical mirror effect on them. If we're intentional enough, usually for one to pace the other, the one who's being more intentional will win. So that's one, just real quick one, is I just breathe and keep myself calm. And then what's going on inside my head, I like picking something that you already have that you're going to tell yourself over and over again that empowers you, that puts you in the right state of mind.
Yeah.
And I know people who use Bible verses. I know people who use just little mantras or their own kind of slogan. The funniest one I've ever seen was a set of foster parents. They had really volatile kids in their house, and their go-to phrase was, "We can do this." So when the kids started throwing stuff around and cussing and screaming, they would just look at each other, and they could even mouth the words, "We can do this, we can do this." And that was their thing that they practiced, telling themselves over and over again. And they use sticky notes. Love and Logic talks about this too. Put your little phrases on sticky notes.
Yeah.
So the thing is, if you went over to their house, you'd see it on the bathroom mirror and say, "We can do this." And then, you see it on the refrigerator. It says, "We can do this." And then they took it too far. I remember it was like on the toilet seat. It said, "We can do this." And I was like, what are you guys doing? But basically, they wanted to see it everywhere because it activates it in your brain. When you see something all over the place, your brain activates that thing. I'm sure you do this with motivation to work out, or people will do it with weight loss. You put reminders everywhere that send the message that you want to reinforce in your brain.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's that quiet self-talk, that those whisperings that I think are really important, and they activate
Yes.
who we are in our identity. And
Yes.
and they reinforce that secure identity, and even coming from a place of having a godly identity, where if the whisperings are true, if they're honest, if they're good, they can strengthen us. But some of those
That's right.
quiet thoughts can also reinforce fear, guilt, or shame. And so
Glad you said that, because fear is probably the big one that we've got to beat. When I respond poorly to a really upset person or an aggressive person, and the parallels here with parents, teachers, and law enforcement are huge.
yeah,
If I perform poorly in any intense situation, a very likely culprit is fear, right? And so one of the ones I picked, one of the phrases I picked specifically for that reason is that love beats fear. And so I'll say that over and over to myself in my head when it's getting really bad and it's getting really intense. Love beats fear. Love beats fear, because I believe that with all my heart, that love will drive out fear. And fear is often the thing that makes me react really poorly. I can't even tell you how poorly I've reacted because my response was a fearful response.
yeah, yeah. And what's really interesting is, and we can learn a lot from officers in tight situations, because they have to deal with a lot of intense situations. And as parents, we can learn a lot because, look, sometimes parenting is tough, and situations can get intense, and they don't stop when they turn 18. I've got a friend who's dealing with a parenting situation right now of his 30-year-old daughter. So,
wow, yeah, the things you can control at that point are pretty minimal.
Yeah, yeah. Now, the third thing that we're going to talk about, Jedd, from emotional intelligence and de-escalation, is preventing anger from turning into violence. It seems like a lot of what you have said kind of nips that in the bud. But when anger does happen, and there are valid reasons to get angry, and I think a key aspect of emotional intelligence is being able to teach children to say, I am angry at you, and actually use those words. Sometimes we've grown up in families.
It's okay to be angry. You're human.
Yeah. A lot of people have grown up in families where anger is bad, where you can't get angry. But it's being able to use anger in a way that's useful to you, where you actually express it in an authentic, honest, and genuine way. But then there's anger, of course, that becomes unhealthy, lashing out to emotional abuse, to physical abuse within a relationship, to domestic violence, violence, towards others that leads to, those kinds of situations with the police department. So, in terms of preventing anger from turning into violence, what are some of the key things there that you would offer? Yeah.
I'm glad you said that too. That especially in terms of what we want to teach our kids, it's not realistic to teach them don't get angry. And this ancient book of wisdom that I try to follow a lot says in there somewhere, in your anger, do not sin. It doesn't say don't get angry. It says when you get angry, don't do something stupid, which is really, really good advice for me as a parent. In terms of preventing violence, and we kind of mentioned this before, of maybe the kid is, maybe I got a big kid. I've worked with, moms that were single moms, and they had two sons that were both bigger than them. and this kid starts to get violent, there are times when I've got to just get away. You know, if I've got a 3-year-old, I'm not going to run away from my 3-year-old and teach them that they're more powerful than mom or dad. But if I got to protect myself, that becomes the number one priority. We used to say, you know, if a kid throws something at you, the preferred technique is duck, right? No, but get out of there, or somehow remove yourself. If you're the target of violence, your first responsibility is to not get hurt. Lessons and authority and respect and all these things will come later, but if I'm really in danger, the first thing I've got to do is protect myself. And that looks very, very different when we're talking about law enforcement. But for parents, I need to make sure that no one gets hurt. So there's elements of violence. So you remember when you were a kid, they did fire prevention? And I think it was like a triangle. And they said fire needs all of these things to exist. So it needs fuel, heat, and oxygen.
Yeah.
And if we could take away one of those three things, no fire. And I believe now they've added a fourth element that is like a chemical reaction, because there's some chemical that can burn without any oxygen. Anyway, if you could take one of those things from violence, hopefully we don't have violence. And those elements, the kind of standard in the de-escalation world is there's a trigger, a target, a weapon, and then a escalation. Very, very rarely do we have people who are just calmly hurting someone. That's always really scary to me, because it, you know, indicates.
So it's a weapon.
Sociopathic.
It's a weapon.
Trigger, target, weapon, and escalated human being, basically. Now, when you say weapon, could a fist be a weapon? Yes. Could teeth be a weapon because you're getting bit, which that's happened to me. It's not fun. So the weapon, if the weapon is
the trigger an
part
incident?
of the person's body, it's hard to take that away.
Jedd, is the trigger the incident?
The trigger is, yes, some triggering moment that, and some of these are seen and some are unseen. You've dealt with people with mental health issues. A mentally ill person can get triggered by something that's not even there or not even real, or that is a flashback. If we think about, post-trauma, it can be a flashback to something that happened.
Yeah.
And just something reminiscent, a smell. We used to have a little boy that would, when we went to clean, he would flip out and flip over furniture, and what we found out much later is it was the smell of the cleaning products. He had been abused, and part of the abuse is they used to lock him in a closet, and in that closet was cleaning products. So when he smelled cleaning products, he would just lose it. And he was a generally nice and well-behaved kid, but man, and we were idiots at first. We didn't have empathy. We said, don't be lazy, it's just chores. Chores won't hurt you. No empathy. When we finally realized what was going on, we worked with him. And while he was working on that, he went outside and picked up trash. We didn't put him through the trigger intentionally once we knew what it was. So, especially if we have kids who have been through trauma, I want to be aware of the triggers. I'm never going to be able to take them all away, but I might know some obvious ones. We had kids who, say it was the anniversary of a death.
Yeah.
We knew they were going to have a really tough day on that day. Or, Christmas time or their birthday might be a really tough time for them. So we knew some of the triggers. I also think self-awareness is big here. When kids or people in general become aware of their own triggers, a lot of times it's very helpful. If you've ever had an insight where you go, oh, that's why I do that. That's why I hate that particular TV commercial, or that's why I don't like that food. My parents would tell me a story. They'd be like, oh, your brother used to do that. And I'm like, oh, that's why I hate that.
Yeah.
So sometimes the self-awareness on the part of the person is enough for them to go, okay, I get it, and then they start doing better.
Yeah.
That was true for this young man I talked about. As soon as he realized, oh, that's why I flip out when it's cleaning day, he started doing better just based on that alone. I mean, not that there wasn't other therapy and interventions that we implemented. So the trigger is, you can't take away all triggers, but you might be able to take away the really obvious ones or the ones you know about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Weapon, I don't want to have obvious things. When we were working with troubled teens, we didn't leave, scissors and stuff laying around. They poured new gravel for the driveway, and they were going to pour these kind of big rocks. And we're like, nah, can we do the little tiny, much smaller gravel? Because we know at some point these kids are going to get mad. They're going to pick up a rock, and I don't want to have a perfect throwing size rock. So weapons are not one we can always do much about either. So that leaves us with the escalation of the person, which is de-escalation, which we've been talking about. And then I think the one that is easiest to affect in an acute situation where there's violence, the one that is the easiest for us to remove from the equation is the target. And so that means if a kid is going to hurt another kid, I get the kid who is going to be hurt the heck out of there. If it's me that's the target, can I trade out with someone else? And we'll talk about this with the law enforcement personnel. For whatever reason, this person just is irate with you. Can you tag out with somebody? And we used to have code words at the residential treatment center I worked. We'd come up and whisper in somebody's ear, hey, you just won the lottery. They needed to go down and collect your millions. And that was just code for you are the target right now. It may or may not be your fault. It's maybe the aftershave you're wearing or whatever. But you're the target, and let's swap you out and see if that will prevent this violence. And it doesn't mean the target wouldn't shift to the new staff member, and I've seen this with teachers, but for sometimes, you've seen this, a person is fixated on someone, and that's who they want to hurt, and we just get the person out of there. That's way easier than calming this person down or all the other pieces of interventions that we might try. And then the one that's really hard to take away, and as a doctor you know this too, it's yourself. When the target of violence is oneself, when kids do self-harm, it's hard to take, you can't take away yourself. I mean, that's what, in the olden days when people would go into a straitjacket, into a mental institution, that's really what they're doing, is they're saying, we're going to not let you hurt yourself. And that's what physical restraints look like in some settings when you're a danger to yourself. Or maybe we put you somewhere where you really just are not going to be able to hurt yourself, or we take away your access to those things that you might use to hurt yourself. But usually, when you're talking about anger becoming violence, it's usually reactive.
Yeah.
Right? So it's wide eyes, and hopefully I can kind of see it coming, and I can get the target of that violence out of harm's way, and that's a short-term solution. Please, parents, don't hear me say run away from your kids when they're mad and don't demand respect. But that's when we get the situation safe, and we can come back and deal with this other stuff later.
Yeah.
But for the priority in an acute violence situation like that, the priority is safety. Everything else, to me, goes by the wayside until the situation's safe again. And then we can talk about what the problem was, or we can get more into what the trigger was, or we can talk about how we don't do that. But in the short run, safety. It's all about taking away that target and seeing if we can make sure no one gets hurt.
This is just great stuff, Jedd. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. It's all things that I've learned from really smart people. I would love to take credit for any of it, but I just learned this from people who were really, really good at keeping things safe and keeping situations calm.
So one of the things that you're also good at, and I'm hoping to have you back for another interview at some point, is...
I'd love to.
Thank you so much. Is comedy. And so, and one of the keys that you've talked about here, and you really broke it down and unpacked it for us, is building empathy. And I'm wondering if you could speak, and I know this is a huge topic, but if you could give us a brief thought on this. I'm curious, how do you balance humor with empathy?
That's a good question. I think the main thing with humor for me, and I've had it backfire, where I was trying to be funny and I upset a person because they didn't take it the way that I intended it, or I'm not a super sensitive person, like people make fun of me I'm bald and people make fun of that. And I think it's funny. Like, I don't get too bent out of shape, but I forget not everyone's like me where I don't take myself very seriously, and I'm pretty eager to laugh at myself, but not everyone's that way. So I've had it backfire where I think, oh, this is kind of lighthearted. This person will take it that way, and they didn't take it that way at all. So one of the things that helped me working with kids is I learned I could make fun of myself. That was pretty safe. That was pretty fair game. As a matter of fact, once in a while, I'd pick on myself and make jokes about my own inadequacies, whatever they were. And once in a while, the kids would go, "Hey, no, don't make fun of yourself like that." They would actually have empathy for me because I was kind of knocking myself, but in a fun way, never in a way where I'm trying to make it sound like, oh, I'm just the worst loser in the world and you should feel sorry for me. It's not that, but just that ability to poke fun at ourselves.
You know what's funny about that
the
is
fact that we're goofy. I mean, I know you as a dad, I know you do this.
Well, my kids called me Fat Daddy, and they did it for months. And a year ago is when it started, and I really was Fat Daddy. And so, but for several months, this went on for 6-9 months, where I was correcting them, saying, listen, we want to be really polite. You know, we don't talk like that, and just do a little bit of lecture and that sort of thing. And then finally I stopped doing that, and I started just accepting the reality that I was Fat Daddy, and Fat Daddy needed to change.
Well, that's the height of healthiness, right? Is when instead of lashing back out at the person who maybe says something that cuts a little close to home, the humor is supposed to be real high on the levels of coping with that, and then even right above that, they say, is self-improvement. If my feelings get hurt, the lowest level of dealing with that is to lash out and hurt someone else.
Yeah.
And as you get, more and more healthy, you can laugh about it, and then you get super healthy. You go, well, I'm going to do something about that. Again, within reason. I think your goal of teaching your kids to be respectful is, of course, a wonderful goal. Back to how I would use it, I felt like, if I was driving a pretty junky car, because we didn't make very much money working with troubled teens. It turns out that's not a super lucrative business, working for nonprofits. And so I could make fun of my junky car, and they'd think that's really funny. And what I tried to never do is make fun of them or something about them or something about their life.
Yeah.
But then once in a while, I love it when you and a kid have a thing that it's kind of a thing between the two of you that you laugh about. Yeah. And I had some kids, and there's probably different opinions on this, but I would have a kid call me a name, or, not like a horrific one, but I remember there was a little boy who, again, my head, he referred to me as pelota, I think, basically saying my head was like a cue ball or whatever. Yeah. And if I wanted to make him laugh, though, I could just point at my head, and maybe intentionally mispronounce the word. And I could make this kid laugh when he was having a hard day or a rough time. And that became our thing, that became what he called me. And for right or wrong, that may not be the greatest example, because once again, some people are probably going, hey, that kid needs to be respectful. But and he does, but more important, I need to have a rapport and a relationship with this kid where I'm in, and he will actually listen to me and take some teaching and guidance about his life from me. I think I watch so many masterful teachers do this, where they are able to laugh at themselves and the fact that they're goofy. Maybe, they dance with the kids or something, and maybe they're not great at it. Not as great as you and I, at least, right? And the kids laugh because they look silly, and their willingness to do that, your willingness to look silly and not be uptight about yourself, I think that goes a long, long way into making it. Lets people's guard down. It lets their guard down, and they go, okay, for whatever reason, I don't feel threatened by this guy because he can laugh at himself.
Yeah, that's good. That's great.
So yeah, if you're writing jokes, don't write them about the kids' shortcomings. Write them about yours.
Yeah. So Jedd, we have to close. I think our hopefully this isn't too long of an interview for our podcasters. Sometimes we have podcasters that do have 1 hour long trips, but so much great meat in here, so much great stuff, and I'm definitely gonna market this interview. But I wanted to give you the last word. I know that you have a big GoFundMe page going, and with your new Mission Peace. I wanted to give listeners an opportunity that might want to support Mission Peace. So could you talk about that and just take a final word here as we finish up? And let me just thank you so much. Yeah.
Oh, it
Go
is
ahead.
a great pleasure, and it's an honor to talk to you. You are a good man. I really appreciate what you're doing. So this is my new thing. We just started it. We just launched it, and that's why there's a GoFundMe. It wasn't my idea. Someone made me do it. But it's been neat because people have been very happy to support it so far. We will soon have a website, maybe even by the time we're putting this up. I'll at least give you the link to the GoFundMe that kind of explains what we're doing. But my mission is to try to be a peacemaker. It has been heavy on my heart to see the division and all the fighting and all the ugliness and between law enforcement and communities. We want to bring a lot of unity. We really want to bring some of these practical skills that we've been talking about, but we also want to foster peace. And I think if we're more intentional about that we can really do it. My hope is we save some lives here. I hope that we help law enforcement and other personnel. We're getting a lot of calls from security teams. There's a security team at a really large church here that's already bringing me in to train their security team, because they'll get people who wander in and maybe they're homeless or they're mentally ill and maybe they're causing some kind of a problem, and they want to be loving toward them, but they also can't let them break the law or something, and they're trying to handle this delicately. These are the exact skills. So it doesn't have to be law enforcement, but that's going to be my main focus, is let's bring some peace between communities. Let's see if we can ease some of this tension, and let's help law enforcement, who I really, really support, and that's why I want to help them be even better at this part of their job.
Great. Thank you so much, Jedd. This has been just fantastic. This is Dr. Daniel Van Ingen with this week's Parenting Podcast, an interview with Jedd Hafer of Mission Peace, and in our Parenting Doctors podcast series. See you next week.